are going to start with the lesson 5. So, this lesson is related with understanding the enterprise, and after completing this lesson, you will understand various types of process concerns companies deal with, and at the enterprise level, and then we'll take companies approach and enterprise level activities in different ways, and we'll talk about the balanced scorecard approach, the alignment of corporate goals and evaluation of managers, business process architecture, and ongoing business performance evaluation. So, when it comes to understanding the enterprise, this is the first phase in business process trends enterprise methodology that focuses on understanding the enterprise as a whole. So, what do you mean by enterprise methodology, right? So that is when it comes to business process management, this is one of the most reputed approach of the methodology for business process management, right? BP10 enterprise methodology. So that we can define it by saying BP10's enterprise methodology. The methodology is a comprehensive, integrated approach to BPM, and that addresses enterprise level, process level, and implementation level. So that when it comes to these BP10's enterprise methodology, you will find three different levels, right? So they are enterprise level, process level, and the implementation level. So you can say this particular methodology, that means BP10's enterprise methodology, is a best practices methodology. Right? That's how they claim it. This is the best practices methodology, because it uses existing tools and techniques in the BP10's enterprise methodology. If you adapted that methodology for BPM, so that means you are not going to have any new techniques or tools, like, but it uses existing tools and techniques like BPMA, right? In practicals, we will talk about it, and balance scorecard, and lean management, etc., providing the common framework or context in which the tools, techniques can be appropriately integrated and coordinated. So that existing tools and techniques will be utilized in this particular methodology, right? So this phase often involves the executive committee or the senior executive of the company. So when it comes to understanding the enterprise, this particular first phase, right, basically involved with the executive committee and the senior executives of the company, the higher echelon of the management of the organization, more or less involved in this particular stage, right? It is absolutely critical that everyone understands and agrees on the basic value chain processes that company supports, and the strategic goals each value chain is responsible for achieving. So that when it comes to BPM, it is extremely important, right? Everyone to understand and agrees on the basic value chain processes. But other value chain processes taken place within the organization, and company supports and the strategic goals of each value chain. What would be the strategic goal of each and every value chain they are responsible for, right? Or to achieve this, in order to achieve this strategies, like, right? So that has to be communicated to everyone, everybody in the, every person in the organization, like, right? Basically, that is done by the high level of the management. So here in this particular diagram, right, as I told you earlier, so we find when it comes to these BP20 enterprise methodology, we find three different levels, like first one enterprise level, second one process level, and the third one implementation level, right? So when we take this enterprise level, right? So what do you find here? Here we can say business process architecture. So here you find basically the business process architecture. Here they say BP10 business process architecture methodology. We call it, right? So what are the components of it? So understand enterprise context. So I think from the first lesson we were talking about you must understand what you are doing in this market, any organization, right? So that you have to understand. So that's what we say, understand the enterprise context and model enterprise processes. So what are these different processes you have to recognize, and then again you have to model it, right? In tool like Visagi will help us to model most of these processes, right? That has to be modeled, and define performance measures. And when it comes to performance of these different processes, you have to have performance measures, right? We call it, or otherwise we call it KPI, key performing indicators. Right? You have to define what key performing indicators you are adapting. Then establish process governance. So in order to take charge of this process, so you have to form a responsible group for that, right? That's what we say, establish process governance. Then we have align enterprise capability, so the resources. So in order to carry out all these, you have to assign these needed resources for that, for the capabilities, right? And lastly, manage the enterprise processes. So throughout the organization, you have to manage it. So that is the enterprise level, right? So when it comes to process level, right? Process level BPM treats process level BPM teams are focused on defining, right, redesigning and improving existing processes. So that when it comes to the process level, what happens is these BPM teams who assign, so they are responsible on, or they focused on defining, redefining and improving the existing processes. So you look at what's really going on at the moment in your organization with regard to these processes, right? So that they define them and redesign it if it is needed, and make the appropriate improvements, right? Here is the process level. Here we say BP10 business process redesign methodology. There what happens? Understand the project, right? First thing, analyze business processes. As I told you earlier, you have to analyze it. How do you analyze? You map it, right? You map from the beginning to the end of that particular process, right? So first, when we are drawing these what you call that modeling, or when we model these process, like we have to identify the triggering event of that process, and then what happens next, and next, and so on. What would be the what you call the end event of that, like start event to the end event. So then analyze these business processes, then redesign business process, coordinate process implementation, and roll out redesign processes and execute these processes, right? So that is the kind of a day-to-day process management. So this happens in at the process level, right? So when it comes to this implementation level, what happens is, here we say HR and IT teams are focused on designing human systems and software systems to implement business processes. At this in this implementation level, what happens is this HR and IT teams, they focus on designing human system and the software systems to implement these business processes, right? So in here, these are the activities which occur: gather requirement analysis. They do the requirement analysis and gather requirement, and they design it and develop it and test it, whatever the system, right? In this level, um, more or less, this HR and IT teams focus on designing human systems and software systems to implement the business processes, right? So this is overall. This is what we call uh, BP10 enterprise methodology, right? Okay. I think I have missed out this diagram, right? Did I? Right. So here, furthermore, they explain it by saying the above figure. So that means this one, right? The above figure provides an overview of the BPI10 process change methodology, right? So this in this figure, we actually picture two complementary methodologies, one for enterprise change and the one for business process change project. So the first one, enterprise level. So overall, they taken the whole organization as such and do the enterprise level changes. And the second one, this at the enterprise level, what happens is we call it business process change projects would take place in this at this process level, right? As I have explained earlier, the BP10 enterprise methodology at the top of the figure, right? BP10 enterprise methodology at the top of the figure defines the activities companies go through to create and use enterprise level process tools. So the first one, if you take enterprise level, right? What are these activities they call it? There you have to perform these to companies to go through, create and use enterprise level process tools. So I mean here what happens is they take the decision that apply to the whole organization, right? The whole completely they occur throughout the whole. The influence is that influence on the each and every part of the organization, right? And the companies go through to create and use enterprise level process tools. Then the BP10 process redesign methodology, or if you take the second one, right, process level, at the so here we say the bottom of the figure defines the steps that process teams go through to redesign or improve a specific business process, right? Yeah, right. Here this process level, what happens earlier I have mentioned in the process level, business process architecture, is process level. What happens is this process level, BPM teams are focused on defining, redesigning, and improving the existing processes. Here we say BP10 process redesign methodology, right? At the bottom of the figure defines the steps that process teams would go through to redesign or improve the specific business process. What are the things that they have to do? They have to understand the project, they have to analyze the business process, they have to redesign the business process, they have to coordinate the process implementation, roll out redesign business process, and explain this process line, right? So that is what we call BPT, process redesign methodology, basically. Then we will take the phase 2 begins with the that was the phase 1. The phase 2 begins with the selection of specific value chain. And the what do you mean by value chain? Value chain is the big processes, right? According to Hammer, right? So that in this big processes and the commitment to create business process architecture for that value. So what do you mean by business process architecture? By the way, we have discussed it in the previous lectures. the first and the second lesson, we can say business process architecture. How do we define it? Business process architecture is a hierarchical model of the business processes of the organization. That is the hierarchical model of business process of the organization we call business process architecture, right? Or else we can say business process architecture is the overview of the set of business processes that reveals their interrelation, if you wish, right? So in the second phase, so the phase 2 begins with the selection of a specific value chain. You have to select the value chain and the commitment to create the business process architecture for that value chain, right? So we take that value chain and we create business process architecture. What is in the business process architecture? So overview of the set of business processes, right? What are these processes with regard to this value chain, right? So I told you what do you mean by value chain? It's a big business process, so that there may be so many other sub processes within that big business process, right? So that we have to identify, and then furthermore we say at a minimum each value chain is defined by elucidating the core business process and sub processes in the value chain, as I told you earlier. So we have to identify the core processes and the sub processes, like in that big process, right? What are the core processes? What are the sub processes in that particular value chain or the big process, right? Then using the business processes defined in the architecture, the team proceed to define how each process will be monitored and measured, right? With regard to these business processes, you should define how these processes will be monitored, how to monitor these different processes and measure the performance of these processes, right? That has to be done. Then depending on the needs of the organization, resources can then be aligned to the processes in the process architecture. So based on the requirement of that of the organization, these needed resources can be allocated or aligned to the processes in the process architecture, right? Then when it comes to refined process governance, once the business process architecture is in place, right? So once you analyze and identify these core processes, sub processes, and how to evaluate, and what are the KPIs you use to measure the performance, right? Once you do it, once the business process architecture is in place and the measures are defined for each of the major processes, the team should move on to the development of the plan of the manage their organization business process. Once you do all this, right? Once you analyze, once you decide on the measurements, so you can plan to manage their organization business process. So different organizations take various approaches with regard to this process or this particular activity of manage organization business process. Different organizations take different approaches. Some rely primarily on functional or the departmental organization. They may have this functional orientation, right? Or in other words, we say departmental organization. And some rely primarily on functional departmental organization, and few rely on process oriented management organization. As we all aware, right? So it's a very rare occurrence that people have this process oriented management in the organization, because we are pretty much stuck with this functional orientation. We are very attached to that, right? Most end up with some kind of matrix that included both functional and process management. In certain cases, what happens is, here as they say, right? Most end up with some kind of matrix that include both functional and process manager. So the amalgamation of it, right? For this mixed approach, they would have this functional orientation and process orientation, right? So the BP trends enterprise methodology focuses on helping an organization to develop basic tools needed to create and manage process-centric organization. Why this BP trends enterprise methodology is important? Here, as they have mentioned, BP trends enterprise methodology focuses on helping the organization develop basic tools needed to create and manage process-centric order. So that the business process BPM enterprise methodology provide us the tools, right? Much needed tools to create and manage process-centric organization. So since we are having more rather the functional orientation in the organization, to have this process orientation, it provides the tools needed to create and manage this oriented organization, right? Process-centric organization. This BP10 enterprise methodology. Once the basic tools are in place and the BPM group is established, the ongoing maintenance and the use of the tools become matter of execution. So once you have these basic tools in place and the BPM group is established, so ongoing maintenance and the use of the tools become matter of execution. You can execute, right? So that is there. So here you again we have in this diagram, you would see this enterprise level. What you find in the enterprise level, I told you the most of the time, the most this highest ranking what you call that the management involved with that. So they are the people who are responsible. They are the people who are responsible for assigning the strategy, right? So they come up with the process architecture and the performance measurement, process management, alignment, and BPM priorities and planning at the enterprise level, right? So when it comes to business process level, so process redesign and improvement project, the tools like Six Sigma, Lean, documentation, right? Documentation projects, these are there, right? So when it comes to the implementation level, right, you have human resource development and IT development. With regard to human resource development, job design, training and development, knowledge management are important. When it comes to IT development, the ERP installation, application development, business activity monitoring, business process management applications are important part, right? And right, so that once we have this process orientation in the organization, it should be something similar to this one, right? So that the first thing we will take the BP10 enterprise methodology. What happens? You understand the enterprise. For that, what you have to do, you have to create business model. So earlier we talked about it and what you are doing at the moment, right? Why you exist. So you should know that, right? So that is why once we find that, then we understand what we are doing, right? So that is what we call create business model, right? Which business model you fall into. Then then we have to define value chain, right? How you people are going to create value for your customers, and that has to be aligned to your overall strategy of the organization. That is what we call understand the enterprise, create business model, define value chain, and align to strategy. Then the second one, define business process architecture, right? Model major processes. So that the business process architecture, when you define the business. Oh, quite a sound. Right. Then when it comes to define business process architecture, you have to model major processes. As I told you earlier, right? How do you model? You take a tool like Visage modeling tool, and you can model the existing process. We call as is processes, right? You model it. Then establish KPI. What do you mean by KPI? Key performing indicators. Maybe profitability, production details, right? So in those KPI we should be able to measure them, right? If we say that within next year we will improve our profitability by 10%, that can be measured, right? If you say that we will increase our production by 50% within these 6 months, that can be measured, right? So that sort of things we call KPI, right? So that the end of that process, what we are going to achieve, like establish KPI, key performing indicator. Then align resources to processes. So in order to carry out these processes, what resources you are needed, and that has to be allocated or align these resources to process, right? That comes under define business process architecture. And the third one, business process management capability, right? So that included identify process managers, define managers scorecard. So what is the scorecard, by the way? Anyone? Have you ever heard? You probably would have heard balance scorecard, right? So that is pretty much relevant to here. This Kaplan and Norton, right? So balance scorecard. So that is a kind of a picture of business performance relative to the vision and the strategy of the four main components. So basically, how do you measure the performance of the organization? We look at this profitability index, the resources we have, the land, buildings, vehicles we have. But Kaplan and Norton have mentioned that we have to consider much more than that. So that accordingly, so they basically have taken four different aspects like financial resources, right? Customers, internal and learning and growth, like. So accordingly, so they first look at the vision of the organization. So they under these four different perspectives, right? Like financial, customer, internal and learning and growth, right? These four aspects, four perspectives we say. So they will look at this strategic aims, critical success factors, strategic measures, and the action plan, right? So that is there. So that in this okay, here we have to define this manager scorecard, like, right? Then create a BPM group, right? You have to BPM group to carry out this business process management. Then last but as a fourth component of this in this business BPM enterprise methodology, we take manage enterprise processes, right? Monitor processes and process manager performance, right? And before we come to that, by the BP10 enterprise methodology, we at the highest level of the organization, the higher echelon of the management should decide what. So they have to look into ongoing strategic process, right? So what are the components of it? So you have to define the business strategy, right? Then you have to monitor the current performance, right? Then monitor environment for changes, then propose changes in strategy as needed, right? So that this strategy formulation, right? If you most of the time, every organization have some sort of a strategy, right? So that they have to first of all they have to decide what strategy they have adapted, right? That's what we call define business strategy. Then they have to they have to monitor the current performance. So how they perform at the moment, right? Then they have to take the monitoring, right? Monitor environment for changes, right? So that if the environment is changes, what happens to the existing or the business strategy? That also change according to the environmental changes, right? That's why we do what pest analysis, right? Or the we take SWOT analysis, and again when it comes to mainly the SWOT and the pest, we do pestel nowadays we call, right? Political, economic, technological, uh, legal, right? Economic, legal, right? Pestel, right? So we monitor the environment for changes. Then propose changes in the strategy is needed. So if there is any requirement of changing based on these environment factors, obviously we have to propose these changes, right? So that has to be done. Then at the enterprise level tools. So what are the tools we use? Define business strategy. We taken into consider business process architecture, right? There, what do? We define the processes and performance measures, right? In business process architecture, we define the existing process and we propose performance measurement. So when it comes to this monitor current performance, align corporate goals with goals of the specific value chains and processes. So, is that different between the corporate goals and the uh, specific value chains goals or the processes goals? Definitely yes. So overall, when you take the organization itself, that is the highest level. So they will have more broader level of goals, right? But when it comes to these different processes, like the latter level, they have somewhat specific goals, but they must be aligned, right? Because otherwise, what happens is the organization's goal will not be able to achieve. The sub processes or the supportive processes are having some other kind of goals, right, in their process, so that those has to be aligned. Then monitor environment for changes. Here, what we have to do? What are the process tools we use? Define measurement, system for monitoring, process manager, performance, right? Then lastly, propose changes in strategy as needed. What are the tools we use? Generate reports on process and process manager performance for executives, right? So that is what we do. That uh, enterprise process managers and those in strategy needed to common set of tools. So these are the common tools that we make use as enterprise process managers, right? So then process level methodology, right? When it comes to process level methodology, the process level methodology is similar to many other methodologies designed to facilitate process change projects and is used over and over again, right? The process level methodology is pretty much similar to many other methodologies we design, right? Methodology designed to facilitate process change, right? Process change project and is used over and over again. The two methodologies are connected in practice because it is the tool created by the enterprise methodology that enables an organization to define, prioritize, and manage at the enterprise level all of their ongoing business process change efforts, right? Here we have basically we talk about these two BP10's business process architecture methodology and the BP10's business process redesign methodology, right? That's what we say. These two tools created by the enterprise methodology to enable the organization to define, prioritize, and manage the enterprise level all of their ongoing business process change effort. So that next we have management of enterprise processes. The BP10's enterprise methodology focuses on helping an organization develop the basic tools needed to create and manage process-centric organization, right? So the BP10's enterprise methodology focus on helping an organization to develop basic tools needed to create and manage process-centric organization. We have mentioned it earlier, right? So the BP10's enterprise methodology helps the organization organization develop the basic tools needed to create and manage process-centric organization. Once the basic tools are in place and the BPM group is established, the ongoing maintenance and use of the tools become matter of execution. We will discuss what day-to-day governance and the process-centric organization entails and provide easy case studies to show the process-centric organization function. So the once you have this, right? Once you have these tools, once you have established these BPM groups, so that is a matter of executing it, right? So here we say everything should begin with the corporate strategy. So we have discussed from the lesson 2 what do you mean by the strategy. So any BPM business process management endeavor start with the corporate strategy, right? In most cases, the corporate strategy has already been developed by executive committees. So I mean without a strategy, so you can't run an organization, right? Even though you are not hard and fast as hard and fast rule you mention it, but you must have some kind of a strategy for that, right? Because otherwise those organizations won't exist, right? Without a strategy you won't find any existence of any organization, right? So it's a matter of analyzing it and identifying. So in most cases the corporate strategy has already been developed by an executive committee. So with regard to these corporations or the business organizations, the strategy is formulated by executive committee, basically the highest level of management, or a group whose major responsibility is the creation and review of the research. Sometimes in some cases there may be special group who assign to creation and review of their strategy, right? So that big corporations or the big organization, they have separate groups. Their major responsibilities to creation and the review of the strategy, right?